As the cliche goes, April showers bring May flowers. But usually what comes after is the heat and dryness of summer. Hello again, Essay here. And before the hot weather of the holiday shows up, you should indulge in my new short story, The White Cat, a free exclusive on Substack. The links are down below in description. Join Margot Thompson, a beautiful stage actress and recent widow who finds salvation in the form of a white cat during a night of terror. While checking out my oddball thriller, remember that my Glitch series is still available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. The links are down below in the description. While you'll find my peculiar story about a white pussy entertaining, that doesn't mean I'm out of ideas. I still have more stories coming down the pike, so as long as I don't run into any mishaps, you'll see those stories as well. Now let's get back to the video.
This is the end, beautiful friend. This is the end, my only friend. The end of our elaborate plans. The end of everything that stands. The end, no safety or surprise. The end, I'll never look into your eyes again. Can you picture what will be so limitless and free, desperately in need of some stranger's hand in a desperate land? Lost in a romance, wilderness of pain, and all the children are insane. All the children are insane.
Hello again, Essay here. What a difference a few months make. Because about, I think it was February, I made a video about how that mess in Ukraine, and I know you're saying, oh God, please not that again. But just give me a chance here. I thought the whole thing had turned into molasses in the middle of winter, you know, just seized up to a complete stop. Well, apparently things are beginning to move again. Sort of like after you take some X-Lax after being constipated for a good day or two. Yeah. And then all of a sudden everything starts moving very fast. Because the people in Moscow, they did something that no one saw at all. They decided to stage an attack on the city of Kharkiv. And you say, what the fuck is that? It's the second largest city in Ukraine. It's over in the northeast. Not too far from Donbass, I might add. And indeed, in the early days of the war, the Ruskies actually entered the Kharkov region where the city is located, but they didn't go near the city, strangely enough. Why? I don't know. I guess they weren't interested. Well, the Ruskies have decided to come back with a vengeance. And this time it looks like they're going straight for that city. Why? Well, if you were paying attention to the news, well, not the Western news, they're not going to tell you anything straight. But people like, say, Patrick Lancaster, you know, that guy, looks like he's afraid of his own shadow most of the time. But hey, he seemed to be a good dude. He's actually on the ground in the Donbass reporting what's happening. And he said that, yeah, for more than a little while, I guess probably at least a year for sure, the damn people in Kiev have been throwing mortars and Katyusha rockets and God knows what else they had on hand into Belgorod. And you say, what the fuck is Belgorod? Well, it's the largest Russian city that's closest to the Ukraine border. How close? Well, if I remember correctly, it's about 40 kilometers. Or, if I remember my metric right, less than 30 miles. That's pretty close. And that Kharkiv city, if I remember correctly, is only 20 miles from the Russian frontier. So if you do arithmetic altogether, it comes out to about 50 miles. And these damn people in Kiev, you know, the people on the Ukrainian side, they've been throwing missiles, they've been throwing drones, and God knows what else into Belgorod. And I guess the people in Moscow got fed up. They said they're going to do something about it. Especially after that stunt that the damn people in Ukraine pulled right around the time they were having their presidential election. The people in Moscow, that is. Because of the brothers at the Duran.com, they said that the Ukrainians, and apparently they had multiple sources to confirm this, they tried to pull something that you could probably only see in an old James Bond film. They sent a major force, or tried to, across the border, and they supposedly were not headed to Belgorod. No, they weren't going towards that town. They were going towards a different location that's in the so-called Belgorod Oblast. And I'm not going to get into the weeds about what an oblast is. This will say if it was in America, we would call it a state of the United States. So, okay. And apparently this location that the Ukrainians were trying to get to but didn't succeed was a nuclear weapons storage site. And you say, oh, yeah. Oh, as in, oh boy. And then, of course, you then ask what the heck what they think they were planning to do, besides get themselves into a whole mess of trouble. Honestly, I don't know. But according to Alex and Alexander's sources, the BrothersRun.com, they either had two things on their mind. either they're going to try to seize the nuclear weapons located there, or at the very minimum, hold the nuclear weapons for ransom. Both are really bad ideas. Because if you can spell the phrase nuclear terrorism, that's a definite description of it. And indeed, I remember the first time I ever heard that phrase. It was no, I'm not talking about that old book, The Sum of All Fears. No, I ain't talking about that book. I'm talking about a different story. It was an old film with Burt Lancaster in it. It came out I think came out around 1980. It was called Twilight's Last Gleaming. And it was about an American general who basically goes a little nuts and takes over a nuclear missile site and was threatening to fire the missile. Yeah, I think it was an HBO film. And I watched it. It seemed okay. I ain't going to tell you what happened at the end, but that was the first time I ever heard the phrase nuclear terrorism. Now, of course, the people in Kiev didn't get that far, because the Ruskies apparently knew where they were and what they were planning and were waiting to hit them off at the pass, and they did. And they intercepted the Ukrainians before they got anywhere near that nuclear site. So there you go. But I think that was probably the last straw for Moscow. And now Moscow has sent a force across the border, across that entire northeast region. And apparently, this is the part that's galling, the Ukrainians basically melted away quicker than Saddam Hussein's army did when the Americans invaded Iraq back in '03. And of course, anyone who's paying attention saw what happened then. And now the people in downtown Kiev are freaking out because they're saying, what happened to our army? Our army's gone, it's not there. And even the Ruskies are surprised because allegedly, according to the Duran.com, supposedly that area of the border between the two countries was supposedly heavily fortified, with trenches and landmines and whatnot. But apparently it wasn't. And now, of course, some of you are saying, who cares? I mean, as long as the people ain't fighting here on my street. I know, I'm getting to that. But apparently, this is just one symptom of what people have been noticing about Ukraine for a long time. It's corrupt place, and 2, it's completely dysfunctional. Now, I'm going to show you a snippet of a video from Clayton Morris at Duran.com. And he has Alexander on there from Duran, and he's going to explain this to you in detail. Okay? Here we go.
Over the past 48 hours, Russia has launched a rather large, if you want to say massive, offensive in the northern part of the country. And this is the spring offensive we've been hearing so much about now that the ground has firmed up. We are also hearing reports of widespread Ukrainian surrenders. Is this a new trend? Is the message getting out that they will either be able to surrender and live a peaceful life eventually or be slaughtered on the battlefield? We're also hearing, of course, that NATO seems to be ramping up once again, beating the drums of war with Germany and the UK and France pointing towards perhaps NATO involvement in this war. So much to talk about and a big shakeup internally inside of Russia. We thought, who better to ask than Alexander Makuras from the Duran, kind enough to join us today from London with his brilliant assessments, as always, about military strategy and geopolitics. Alexander, great to see you. Welcome back to the show.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure, my pleasure. So first, I guess let's start with this offensive. The Western media has been silent on it, not surprisingly. Nothing really in the United States to talk about a Russian offensive, but it appears that maybe not a full-scale spring offensive, but maybe a large one nonetheless. What do you know about what we're seeing with the Russian forces in the north?
Well, as you correctly said, there's a lot of fog of war. But the impression I've had is that over the first couple of days, the immediate period that you've been mentioning, the last 48 hours, we've not yet seen the Russians commit their main army, their main forces. Apparently, this was an advance by relatively lightly equipped infantry troops crossing the frontier into Ukraine. And what happened was that even as these infantry advanced, the Russian Air Force has been very active, lots of drones, lots of artillery strikes, and the Ukrainian defenses collapsed. It was much more unexpected by the Ukrainians themselves, and I think by the Russians. But a string of villages falling one after the other, tumbling one after the other into Russian hands. No sign of an organized Ukrainian defense, no sign of minefields or fortified lines about which we've been hearing so much. The Ukrainians have now sacked the general who was in charge. There's reports that the Ukrainian leadership are in recriminations with each other. The intelligence chief, a man called Budanov, is saying that it's all the fault of the military chief, Syrskyi, that this thing has gone as badly as it has. And there's lots of reports that the Ukrainians, facing what is looking like a debacle on their northern borders, and unsure how far the Russians intend to go, are now pulling in troops from every single part of their front lines, weakening their front lines even further. Now, for me, what this shows is the fragility that Ukraine has reached at this point in the war. A relatively limited offensive by the Russians, but an unexpected one, or at least it shouldn't have been unexpected because it's been much talked about, but a new offensive that they weren't really prepared for. And it's creating a crisis right across the entire Ukrainian battlefronts. And that tells you that tells me that Ukraine is literally at the end of its resources. It's like it's trying to hold back the flood. It's trying to plug the holes in the dike as the flood comes in, and there are more and more holes springing in, and they're finding it more and more difficult to do.
I guess it's a two-pronged question here, because it seems like then NATO, this is a desperate moment here for NATO. They will either have to throw in the towel, walk home with their tail between their legs, or commit to something perhaps larger. We've already seen that weapons don't seem to be enough. Now you're going to have to put some sort of boots on the ground. We heard from the Russian ambassador who spoke to Member of Parliament Andrew Bridgen in your neck of the woods, who said, and he told him flat out, we know that Ukrainians aren't firing these missiles. You, the British, are there firing these at us. And we know, and we are at war with you. So now I guess it's up to NATO. How large do you want to go here?
I don't think that the NATO people themselves know, and I think they're very divided about this. I don't think they ever expected in their darkest nightmares a year ago that they would be in this situation. A year ago, they were all talking about the Ukrainian offensive, and they were expecting that Russia would be defeated. And a year before, they'd been confident that the sanctions would have their effect. So they find themselves in a situation of impending disaster. And of course, it's a disaster they've brought on themselves because they've so invested in Ukraine. They've put so much of their own credibility on the line in Ukraine that if Ukraine falls and goes under, inevitably that credibility is going to be badly damaged. Now, they all know that. They don't have a simple answer to this. They know that whatever weapons they send to Ukraine is never going to be enough. They know that Ukraine's manpower problems are becoming impossible. So what do? They can talk to the Russians, but there are enormous political obstacles in the face of doing that. And it would be deeply humiliating, and it would reverse the entire course of Western policy. Or alternatively, they can escalate by sending in troops and taking on incredible risks and perhaps provoking a big popular reaction in Europe and perhaps in the United States, or they can do nothing, hope that something turns up, and if Ukraine goes down, will hope that the damage to their credibility can be limited in some way. So, not an attractive series of options. But
Yeah.
it is unsurprising, maybe, that some people are talking about escalation, given how bad the situation is.
Yeah, can you imagine? Not, as you point out, not in their darkest nightmares did they anticipate over 600,000 dead, over 1 million casualties on the Ukrainian side, that this would be just I guess, a fountain of eternal human beings and resources that NATO could use over and over and over again. If we just kept supplying them with weapons, little did they realize they would wipe out an entire generation or two of Ukrainian men. Yeah, to your point, who are they going to throw at this? Now we're hearing, of course, over the past 24 hours, Germany has now stepped up, lowering their conscription standards to 18 years old, and they're not going to care which gender you are. So 18 years old to go on a war footing, the UK as well. France, Macron going back and forth, and again over the weekend saying he hopes we don't have to commit troops. So to your point, it seems like NATO is all over the map right now and doesn't really have a clear sense of what they want.
No, they don't. And I mean, in Germany, this is going to be very unpopular, reintroducing conscription shortly after, a couple of years after it was ended. Major demand in Germany to end conscription. And now they're talking of bringing it back. But that will be controversial, but it can probably just about stick. But not if German soldiers are going to be sent to fight Russia in Ukraine. I mean, that will not be acceptable to the German public at all. You're going to get major protests in Germany if anything like that happens. So, but what they have done is exactly the opposite of what they were trying to do when this conflict began. The whole plan was to weaken Russia, to make Russia weaker militarily, to destabilize its economy, to somehow isolate it from the rest of the world. Everything has turned out otherwise. Russia is militarily much more powerful. Its army is bigger. It's also much more efficient than it used to be. It's outproducing the West in weapons. It is very angry with the West indeed, which is unsurprising, but it is. And perhaps Western leaders think that it's even angrier than it actually is, in fact, but that's another story.
Right.
And of course, it's not politically isolated in the world. It's got strong friendships with China and India, and the West has tried to undermine those, and it hasn't worked. And the economy is stable as well. So what they have done is that they have taken steps which have made the reality of the Russian threat real, which it had no reality before. They've achieved the exact opposite of what they expected. And of course, now they're rushing and they're coming up and they're saying, we've got to do something because the Russians are coming. We've got to build up our forces again. We've got to rearm. We've got to rebuild. We've got to do all of these things. But doing such things would require major revolutionary transformations in Western societies, European societies, which I'm far from convinced the governments in the West understand and would know how to manage, and which I also strongly suspect Western publics would not be keen on at all. Remilitarization of Western societies is going to be extremely difficult to do now.
I hope you're right about that. I hope you're right. But we've got some crazy leaders that don't really care what we think. At the end of the day, sadly, just look at the United States right now. I'll get you out of here on this, Alexander, which is the number of surrenders that we're seeing. You know, you're not, again, hearing this in the Western media, the number of Ukrainian men who are surrendering. As you pointed out, Russian forces are finding basically no defense at all when they've been entering these villages. And from the reports I've seen, We're seeing a lot of Ukrainian men just surrendering. They're getting these messages, I guess. I don't know exactly how they're or how they're delivering these messages from the Russian side, like lay down your arms. You don't need to die in this conflict. You can just surrender. What do you know about the number of surrenders? Are we seeing more now, do you think, than we were seeing months ago?
Yes, I mean it's been a steadily rising trend for several months now. It's not yet reached critical levels. We're not seeing whole units, lay down their arms and surrender, but we're seeing large groups of soldiers starting to surrender. And on the first day, apparently around 50 men, like Ukrainian troops, laid down their arms and surrendered. Now that may not sound like a lot, but in the context of this war, it is. And it's another sign of the general war weariness and demoralization that is starting to take hold in Ukraine. There was an article in the London Times when they were interviewing a Ukrainian soldier, and they asked him, this is the London Times, do you think this war will end in victory? And he simply said no. No, Ukraine is going to lose. And that was a Ukrainian soldier in the military, under military discipline, speaking to a Western media channel, a major Western media outlet. So, I mean, and I think you're getting more and more of that sense right across Ukraine now, that the war is lost, that there are politicians in Kiev who don't understand it, but that's inevitable now.
I did say I was going to get you out of here a second ago. I have to ask you about Shoigu, of course.
Yeah.
The shakeup over the weekend we learned inside of the Russian military. Apparently, he's now going to be, I think, in charge of national security, removed from his position. Is this a big deal, or is this an affirmation that Putin won an election and a landslide? He has the mandate of the people to do what he wants. Do you see a shift in military strategy with this move?
I think there is a shift, actually, though the point about a mandate is a good one. First of all, it is not a demotion of Shoigu. I mean, he's been appointed to a very senior position, one which nominally is higher than the one he previously occupied. Secretary of the Security Council is a very senior position indeed in Russia. But he's also been given, and this has not been reported in the West, you have to go to the official Russian news agency TASS to see this. He's been given a whole set of new responsibilities as Secretary of the Security Council, which his predecessor in that role did not have, which basically puts Shoigu in overall charge of the Russian military-industrial complex and gives him responsibility for weapons development. Now, this isn't, as I said, something that people in the West are aware of, but what I think Putin has done is he's taken Shoigu, who's a trained engineer and a very experienced and very capable manager, and who's recently been touring the factories and making sure the production of weapons increases. He's basically freed him from the responsibility of the administrative burdens in the defense ministry and given him this job of basically supervising the military industrial complex. So it's an important role, and it also means that he's now very close to Putin as national security advisor. He's Putin's effective national security advisor as well. So it's a sort of sideways shift, but an important one. Whilst the person who's taking over from him in the defense ministry, who's a man called Belousov, is a very, very experienced Soviet-era economic technocrat whose background basically is in long-range planning, who was running the overall Russian economy until a few days ago. He's apparently a very well-regarded figure. And I think his job is, now that military production and spending within the defense ministry has increased to such an extent, to make sure that this is streamlined and is actually going where it's needed, rather than, on fancy projects or other things. So it's an interesting set of decisions. But as I said, not one that I think has been well understood in the West.
No, I think you're right about that. I think it's Putin fires his, top guy. Does this mean that they're losing the war? Those are the types of headlines you'll see in the West, of course. So it's actually a promotion, and he actually has a much bigger job now ahead of him as NATO is trying to find out how they can throw everything they can at their military-industrial complex right now. Alexander, great to see you. Where can people find your work? I mean, I follow you on multiple fronts, but where can people follow you?
Well, I have my Telegram, my YouTube channel, Alexander Mercouris, which you can find on YouTube and on all kinds of other platforms, BitChute, Odyssey, wherever. I also, of course, work on the Duran with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. We got our channel, the Duran, on YouTube. And we can also find me on Locals, where I'm also present, but that's as part of the Duran. You can find all my videos there. So type in my name in YouTube, and you'll come to me, and you'll come to all of these other places also.
Perfect. Well, must watch content all the time. Alexander, great to have you here. Thank you for your expertise as always, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, you saw that. All I can say is, the funny thing is, it's kind of sad. I mean, sad for us here in this country, because our leaders have been giving those clowns in Kiev all kinds of money, all kinds of weapons, all kinds of pussy, and everything else, and these people are just making a rotten cheese sandwich out of the whole damn deal. I mean, these people in Ukraine are such lunkheads, they can't seem to find their own asses with a Ravenelli road atlas, a GPS system, and a flashlight. I mean, how the hell do you lose all that money? It's ridiculous. But then again, like I said, that's the problem with that damn country. The country is just so unbelievably corrupt. Indeed, it reminds me of, and the funny thing is, this has happened before throughout history. Indeed, I remember reading about what happened during the waning days of the Vietnam War. When I think it was 1974, no, late 74, and the Americans officially was no longer fighting in Vietnam, and supposedly there was a technical truce between Hanoi and Saigon, but then of course that lasted for about 5 seconds, and then of course Hanoi, launched a major attack on the South, and the people in the South didn't fight. No joke. I remember I was a kid at the time. I remember seeing it. It was in the Time magazine. It had this full-length, 2-page photograph of a road, and it was taken by the people from the north. It was taken from the North Vietnamese army, and it showed this picture of a road headed south, and it was littered with abandoned jeeps, a tank here or there, and all of these uniforms. Where it's helmets, shirts, pants, everything. And I remember the caption said that North Vietnamese soldiers find abandoned South Vietnamese uniforms and equipment on a road coming from the DMZ, because there was actually a DMZ between North and South Vietnam, and the North crossed the DMZ and started heading south. And the damn people in the South Vietnamese army just abandoned, just gave up. They didn't fight. They just ran away. Now, of course, some of you who probably were around during that time and probably knew it probably would figure, well, hell, if the whole North Vietnamese army was coming down the road towards me, I'd probably dump my uniform and run away too. Yeah, but guess what? You're not South Vietnamese, so you'll figure it's your country. You figure you would want to fight for it, but these people wouldn't fight. They just ran away. Sad. And as for the incompetence part, yeah, the South Vietnamese government, it was pretty incompetent. I mean, totally incompetent. I mean, when everyone started deciding that they were going to just save their own skin and not fight North Vietnamese, it turned to a total, what is it, 5 alarm dumpster fire. The chaos that was happening in South Vietnam. Now, I'm not saying that's happening in Ukraine yet, but let's just keep our eyes and ears open, because this might be the moment that the Ukrainian army finally breaks. And of course, history is full of examples of where you will have a war between two sides, and then one side finally, gives up the ghost and basically loses its will to fight, and they either surrender in mass or they just run away. Like Saddam Hussein's army, it chose not to fight, and most of their people surrendered or ran away back in '03. And then, of course, like I said, South Vietnam, same thing. And there's a few other great examples. Like I remember reading about what happened during the British Civil War. Now you say, man, that's a long time ago. Yeah, I know, but I remember reading about it and how the damn royalist forces initially was fighting the British Parliament, what they refer to as the Roundheads, and Oliver Cromwell. But then at a certain point, the royalist forces basically broke. And I think it happened after, I can't remember the name of the battle now, it's been so long, but it was a battle that happened north near the Scottish border, where the Scots initially tried to intervene, but didn't really do a good job, and they got their ass beat. And then after that, everything just started falling apart all over England, as various formations that belonged to the royalist forces either were defeated in the field or surrendered, or in some cases just fled, just melted away. And of course, as history books tell us, eventually old King Charles, no, not the current one, this was Charles the First, not Charles the Third. Yeah, he got captured, and then he ended up getting his head chopped off. So there you go. Now, I don't think Zelensky's going to get his head chopped off, even though I think there's probably more than a few people involved in this mess that probably would like to chop his head off. But I don't think he's going to go down like that. Nah. I don't think he's going to end up like the last emperor of the Byzantine Empire. That's another good example of an army that basically broke. Because during that war, which actually, if I remember correctly, happened in the middle 15th century. I think it was 1454. Yeah, the Ottoman Turks showed up at Constantinople, which was the last remnant of the Byzantine Empire. They kicked in the door of the city-state. That was all that was left of the Eastern Roman Empire. And man, it just turned into a total massacre. And when the smoke cleared, the only thing they found left of the Byzantine emperor was his headless body. I always remember reading about that. They said the only reason why they knew it was the emperor's body was because he was wearing the slippers of the emperor, which supposedly had the two-headed eagle on the instep. And I'm thinking, yeah, he didn't turn out too well. So what's going to happen now? Well, apparently the initiative's in the hands of the Ruskies now. Now, some people, like you saw in that video from Clayton, they might just stop outside of Kharkiv, or they might actually take the city. Nobody knows. But the thing is, the way the situation looks right now, the people on the other side, the Ukrainians, they are just in no position to do anything to stop them. That's the important part. And then you have the knuckleheads over there in the Atlantic Council, NATO HQ. I know they're wetting themselves. And it's not just Macron either. I mean, I think all of them are pissing the bed now, because they realize, holy shit, this whole damn Ukraine deal is heading south faster than a virgin in a whorehouse. And I'm thinking, yeah, it is. Because these people who helps us facilitate this whole damn mess, and let's not pretend this mess got started because the people in the damn Atlantic Council didn't stick to that old piece of paper, or I should say lack of piece of paper, that Bush 41 and Gorbachev agreed to all the way back in 1991, to where the people said that if we, the Soviets, pull out of Eastern Europe, you, the Yankees, and NATO will stay put. You will not move 1 inch east. But they threw away the agreement. Just threw it away. And I remember Madeleine Albright, who used to work with Bill Clinton, she said in an interview many years ago that the reason why they did was because they wanted insurance to make sure in case Russia goes bad. Well, guess what, Albright, who is no longer in this world? By your very actions, you had, what's that Latin word for it? A fait accompli. By your very actions, moving the boundaries of NATO all the way up to practically to the gates of the Kremlin, you basically created the very thing you claimed you wanted to avoid. So there you go. And now these people are in a whole heap of trouble, and they'll know how to get out of it. Reminds me of an old country song, got a tiger by the tail. Well, guess what? The people in NATO, as well as the people in Kiev, they do got the tiger by the tail. And just like in that country song said, they can't let go. Because they know if they let go, the tiger's going to eat them. So they're hanging on to the tail of the tiger for dear life. Oh no. So sad. It's very sad. Especially since people are dying out there right now. At least the ones that are standing and fighting, of course. Most of the people who are not standing and fighting, they're running away. Yep. This whole damn Ukraine deal has definitely turned into a shit sandwich. And despite all the proclamations from all these various political commentators all over the computer about how they said that, oh, the people in the Atlantic Council were just hoping and praying that the people in Kiev could just hang on until at least the November election in the United States, then maybe if Biden gets a second term, and there was no guarantee that was going to happen, maybe they can somehow do something to fix the problem. Well, yeah. This might indeed very well be the end, as Jim Morrison said in one of his better songs. And thus it looks like, and no man knows the future, but it looks like this may very well be the beginning of the end of the Ukraine war. And it's not ending the way the people in the Atlantic Council thought it should have ended. Nope. It certainly isn't. Well, that's all I have to say about that total miserable shit stain of a debacle that Ukraine war is turning into. And that's my opinion.